Hello, I'm Robin Fears, and I'm the moderator of the scientific session entitled Climate Action to Protect and Promote Health, Building and Sharing the Evidence. Thank you to all of you for joining us today. This presentation is one of three, in fact it's the final one of the three, pre-recorded videos focusing on a speaker's material before all of our panelists come together in February during the live discussion. Why are we organising this session? Well, climate change is happening here and now, and with increasingly adverse consequences for human health, as well as the environment. Our speaker today is Deoraj Caussy, who will be discussing climate change and health in Africa, from impact to action. Deoraj is an independent epidemiologist in Mauritius and is chair of our African Working Group, NASAC, of the IAP project on climate change and health. Later on in this video, Deoraj and I will be discussing some of the points that arise from the session, from the slides that he is presenting in a moment. So, welcome again, Deoraj, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Greetings. My name is Deoraj Caussy, and I'm delighted to be with you today to share the experience of climate change and health in Africa, from impact to action. We, like Robin mentioned, we are interconnected in this world with climate change by the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat. So what happens globally is of interest to Africa. And what happens in Africa is of interest to the rest of the world because of the interconnection. And as Robin mentioned, climate change is happening near and how in Africa as in elsewhere. So what I will do, I will chart out a small journey to show why we are vulnerable in the African continent. Where comes our vulnerabilities? Then I'm going to look at some of the impacts it's having. There's no way I can look at all the impacts and create a short snapshot. From there, we move on and we're going to see what solution do we have at hand to adapt, to mitigate, and to collaborate on this issue. So as I mentioned to you, to all of you, climate change is happening in Africa, and we are one of the most vulnerable continents to climate change, and consequently to the health also. Our vulnerabilities stem from at least 4 minimum features. First of all, the geographical features. The land is so diverse and the climate is so diverse. We have covered a wide range of climatic curve, from tropical to equatorial to coastal, and the land also changes from arid to semi-arid, which in turn confer a physical vulnerability for what we can grow, where we can eat, where we can get the water. On top of that, we have the climatic hazards, that we have the high prevalence and incidence of the prevalence of the hazard all the time. The population who lives on the continent are vulnerable. They're vulnerable because they already have a pre-existing level of climatic sensitive diseases that run the risk of being amplified as the climate changes. And we have low adaptive capacity, mostly because of our infrastructure is not fully developed, or there's poverty to introduce high-level infrastructure. The health system as it is, like I mentioned, is already burdened with existing diseases. And on that burden now, we're going to put the caseload of climatic-associated diseases, and that's going to play havoc on the continent, on the health. If you look on the right-hand side of the map, you can see that we are one of the most vulnerable continents to climate change and health. In fact, as many as 120,000 additional deaths per million inhabitants is due in Africa alone, with the highest continent as shown on that map. How we are vulnerable, what impacts it's having? Well, it's having multiple impacts. The health impact is due to multiple exposure pathway. There's direct, indirect, and combined sometimes. And I'm going to illustrate this by choosing the most direct one of drought, flood, and pest. Directly, these three hazards, well, I consider pest infestation also as a hazard because indirectly of climate change. It will lead to food insecurity, crop failure. When crop fails, they reduce production, of course, of food, and we have increased food insecurity. With that come the consequence of malnutrition. We already have projected number of deaths due to malnutrition to be very high on the continent. And what happens? We get 60% of the food supply is grown locally. The remaining is imported or we depend on aids. In any scenario of climate change with food insecurity, we depend heavily on imports and on growing fast-growing crops that could be energy dense, the imported food also. So it put us at increased risk for non-communicable diseases, especially heat stroke that can lead to loss of life and livelihood. It can exacerbate poverty, and it can provoke people into civil unrest and migration because of being demoralized, of losing loved one, properties, land, and going into other areas and suffering mental depression and health. Well, on this left side, you can also see the flood will have indirect effect also. Also, the malnutrition have indirect effect, but flood also will lead to affecting the water and the food we drink, and that will again lead to malnutrition, death associated, especially cholera and other type of diseases. So this interacting pathway where one sector spill over into other sectors and have a joint impact, which is very hard to sometimes decipher, is a common running theme in not just the food insecurity, but also vector-borne diseases and other diseases that are prone to climate sensitive. We can go in and look at every single sector and every single disease, but we're not going to get very far by doing that, because after a while comes, we have to look at a way to deal with it. Dealing with it, we have to deal with a cross-cutting manner. Through adaptation is the first tool that we have. Public health package to reduce the health impact. And that is best done by preparedness plan that is prepared, that is formulated properly by undertaking a vulnerability assessment and adaptation, the VAA, as proposed by WHO. Based on the VAA, then we can produce our nationally determined contribution, which is a commitment about all countries following the Paris Agreement to submit to UNFCCC to show where we are in the progress. Well, as shown on the left-hand side of the map, you can see with regard to NDC, Africa is doing very well. In fact, we're doing better than most part of the world. But let's not be taken by this map. We are doing well. We have included health. We mentioned the word health, but we're not doing much in terms of concrete action that is missing. So our NDC is missing in the health adaptation plan. Why it is missing? It's because we are working alone in silos. The environment and the Ministry of Health are working alone, and they're not talking to each other to reduce, to increase synergy and to reduce redundancy and duplication. There's no mechanism in place for that sectors to talk to each other. We strongly advocate that we implement the health in all policy of WHO to allow this to be happening. We know adaptation is the most immediate goal that we have to do, but there are other equitable solutions that we have to also implement to exist, to buckle the existing gaps. Database is one of it. Policymakers need evidence-based data to formulate the policy and implement the program of action. We need to establish a database that look at the prevalence and the incidence of climatic hazards in time and space. And then to link that disease with that hazard database to get mortality with exposure in real time. This is missing for most part of the data that we looked in Africa. It's very scanty. There's a dearth of information. In fact, even to count numbers like death due to flood, the numbers are not available. So we really need to remedy this database. The other one we need is we need evidence to show that mitigating have co-benefits in the health and the non-health sector. For instance, by introducing clean energy in transport sectors, we'll have health benefit, reducing cardiovascular diseases and respiratory diseases. Similarly, in agriculture sector, we'll again reduce the impact of health in overall. But to do that, it requires sophisticated modeling, which is beyond the capacity of most of the countries in Africa. Some can undertake it, some very few but most of us are unable to do that. So we need to partner with established scientists and institutions abroad to conduct real research with African scientists conducted in Africa with joint agenda and leave behind a sustainable structure so that research can continue. I mentioned adaptation. Of course, we have to address mitigation. We have to empower the local communities because the indigenous local communities has been living with climate change for the longest time, and they have indigenous knowledge. We just have to empower them to give them that extra push so they can cope with the climate change. For instance, they can change the habit. They can introduce nature-based solution, planting fire-resistant trees, drought-resistant crops, change the lifestyle and diet, less meat, to adapt to stove cooking, switch off weaning from coal fuel, and we have to promote green space in urban planning. So these are some of the action that we can undertake. We are asked with the question of adaptation and mitigation. Adaptation will have immediate benefit, but adaptation has limit. Eventually, we have to mitigate. How are we going to mitigate? The COVID pandemic have left us havoc on our economies, on our society, and on our way of living. A lot of jobs is going to be lost. It will take years and a lot of money to recover and come back on course. But it also gives us an opportunity to introduce green technologies. To introduce green technologies, again, we need substantial financial commitment to install, maintain, and sustain. Some of this is happening already with the Europe-Germany partnership, but we need more partnership in that direction. So my take-home message is climate change is happening now in Africa. It is a problem that will not be resolved within the boundary of one nation or one continent. It's a global issue, and it requires a global solution. We already bear the brunt in Africa. We produce less greenhouse gases, and we disproportionately bear the brunt of climate change and health. So, but this global solution is beyond the capacity of most African countries. So I strongly urge to partner, to forge alliance, and to sustain it to combat this scourge of climate change and health in Africa. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Deoraj, for your thoughtful and evidence-based presentation. We now have about 10 minutes to discuss some of the issues arising from what you've said and related issues. But I could start by saying that you presented some very important findings for Africa, drawn from the Regional Academy Network activity. And the publication of your NASAC work will, of course, be tremendously important for the region of Africa. But it's also a vital resource to inform global considerations, and you emphasize the global aspect in your last slide. And as you know, your work is part of the Global Inter-Academy Partnership Project. But your region is, of course, diverse. And I wonder if there's anything more you would like to say about the similarities and differences between the region of Africa and other regions in the world, with a view to us all exploring what are the common issues to emphasize at the global level.
Well, like I said in the beginning, we are interconnected globally by the food we eat, the water we drink, and the air we breathe. So we have common elements. The hazards, climatic hazards, they are present worldwide. Some of them to less extent. The level of it may be different. So that is there. And our ability to cope with it is also we're facing the same coping mechanism. We are dealing with poor infrastructure, particularly in Africa, but also in Latin America and Central America. So with these, the common challenges we're facing. And we are indigenous people who are vulnerable, who are marginalized, but they have the knowledge. They've lived, like for instance, the people who live in the Arctic, they know the Arctic best. They know how to live with the season, what to grow, and how they're affected by it. So we need to empower them. And same in Africa, people who've been dealing with crops for years, with pastoral life, they need to be empowered. So these are some similarities, but some differences that exist. Of course, we have a lot, we don't have as many small island developing states, but we do have, as in South America, but we do have some here also. But we have coastal erosion, most of West Africa, and we have about 6 small island developing states. I'm myself from one of the small island developing states. But the difference again is South America, America as a whole, but then you have to look at North and South. South America and Central has the benefit of having the sophisticated US and Canadian technology and knowledge base that can be shared at a distance to our South America. We are at a disadvantage for this. This we notice not only for climate change and health, but for instance, when during a polio eradication, we were able to eradicate polio in South America so fast because of all the technical help and support from US and Canada. And it took longer to eradicate polio in Africa because we don't have that satellite arm to guide us, to sponsor us, very quickly. So these are some of the issues, but others, we're facing the same issues everywhere.
Thank you, Deoraj. You mentioned issues for empowerment. And as you know, what the overall theme of the 2022 AAAS meeting is empowering with evidence. Can you discuss a little bit about how, in your experience, academies can help with this empowerment in building and using the evidence base? I think there's perhaps 3 strands here, and please answer whichever ones you want. First, how can academies in Africa work together to inform policy making? Secondly, how can academies help to share good practice between the countries in the African continent to understand and implement the different solutions you've talked about? Thirdly, how can the scientific community in the academies engage with other stakeholders and with the public to inform them about climate change, the potential risks and solutions, and the need to change behavior?
Yeah, this is a challenging, daunting task, but one that really has reward to be done, because there's so many players in the field about climate change and health, and the information is sometimes a plethora of information, but they may not be the right information, and sometimes it is so technical and sparse and spread out, and you have to really navigate a lot of books to get one information that you need, for instance. And academies, we are the beacon of science. And it's our role to synthesize information, make it available in a digestible, in an understandable fashion to everybody in a simple language, to policymakers, to program implementers, for international developers, for the citizen, for everybody. So we can produce these guidelines that we have for imperative. We are not like the WHO norms and standard, but we are cross-cutting. We're bringing everything on board. We're not focusing only on health and we're leaving out the environment, but we're interconnecting all of this. I think this is a wealth of information. This is our added value that we bring in. And we have to set the agenda. We can set the agenda in international meetings, international fora, in local, at country level, regional level, and we're doing that already. We have to be supported in that task to get it from the policy, from the textbook, from the internet, to the grassroots level where it is needed. So we have to disseminate more. The information has to trickle down at each level. Everyone will have a role to play. When it comes down to the regional level, we have workshops at national level to disseminate that, and becomes in turn their job to enlist the academician, the young scientists, so they can take that step forward.
Thank you. Extending that analysis to the global level, we're speaking now shortly after COP26 has taken place. Of course, we all hope that the promises made there can be kept. Did you think there was enough focus on health at COP26? Looking ahead to COP27, which of course will be hosted in Africa, how should the scientific and health communities prepare for the agenda for COP27, in your view?
Sadly enough, I did not see enough health in the COP26. We attended, and I was in the health pavilion of WHO, also participated. It's sad, but it also reflects what I just said earlier. There was not that interaction between health and non-health sectors. It's working in silos, even at that level. People are focusing only on the physical aspect, and those working on health, they're marginalized. Obviously, we live in an ecosystem where we're part of the ecosystem. The human being is part of the ecosystem. We have to protect the life of human being so we can protect the ecosystem that we are living in. And we have to change that. It will be a stepwise process. Again, we have to set the agenda from global level. We have to galvanize support. We have to work with donor agencies, make sure that they include the health in the development project, because oftentimes health's been marginalized, and they say, "Oh, okay, climate change. The health is dealing with that." But how is health dealing with it? They haven't got the financial resources. They haven't got the support they need. They get having a blueprint. Many of us don't even have the blueprint. What do we do with the blueprint? We need to go beyond that, from a menu to actually ingredients for cooking the food. So that's what we're missing. And I think there was support there was enough, from what I gathered, there was enough interest for COP27. As you know, at the Academies, we are working hard in this. I also work with the Global University with the Consortium of Global Universities for Climate Change and Health. And we are also galvanizing support at that level. And what we're doing at the AAS now, the members of AAS have a moral obligation to take that step forward, because US has a big player, not just in America, in North, South, or Central, but global. And I think the members of the Academies has taken on them to link with the academic communities and start to galvanize now. We need to start to gather data. We need to show the impact that health is having, climate is having on health, and give it a proper status. Then we can take it forward.
Thank you, Deoraj. We're just about out of time, although, of course, we could carry on for much longer if time had permitted. I just want to reinforce a point you made in your final answer, that yes, indeed, the AAAS itself provides a diverse yet committed audience for communicating the evidence-based perspectives that you've been doing. And the AAAS in this session and other sessions provides a very important forum for global discussion and action. And indeed, as you say, we can see that as a critical ally and conduit for the activities we will be pursuing next year in the run up to COP27. Okay, so we are run out of time, unfortunately. So let me thank you again, Deoraj, for your presentation and stimulating discussion. Thank you to all of our audience for joining us. Let me just remind you that this is one of the 3 spotlight videos focusing on the individual work of our 3 speakers who will come together in February in our live panel session on climate action to protect and promote health, building and sharing the evidence. So it just remains for me to say we look forward to seeing you then and to further stimulating discussion. Thank you very much, Deoraj. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you, everybody.